let's just start off with the kwacha and the fact that it's actually been strengthening. We know that the Bank of Zambia has time and time again said that it would be intervening. It hasn't done so. Is this a signal that the kwacha is going to be left to its own devices for some time to come?
Well, what we've actually seen is that the kwacha has faced some pressure over the recent weeks, and it's depreciated to now a level that has previously been thought to be a psychological level that the Bank of Zambia has defended. They've never been very explicit in their intentions to defend the currency at any certain level, but we have seen that the central bank has come into the market at times when initially the currency threatened to breach the 5,100 level against the dollar, and more recently at the 5,200 level against the US dollar. So since yesterday, we saw that it was ticking closer and closer to this level, and there was an anticipation in the market that the central bank would once again step in and buy the local currency using its foreign exchange reserves to do so. However, it did not do that yesterday and did not do that today. So we've actually seen it break that psychological level of 5,200 kwachas against the US dollar. So we do feel that the environment has become less supportive of the kwacha despite very strong copper prices on the global markets, and this is mainly due to the low level of interest rates in the domestic market. So we've seen that since November 2011, monetary policy has eased somewhat in that liquidity conditions have been loosened, and we've seen that the central bank has become far less active in mopping up liquidity, and it has cut the cash reserve requirements. It did that in November 2011, and we've seen domestic rates come off quite sharply. And overall, I do believe there's slight nervousness around the investor climate and some policy changes that the government has suggested, including that of a windfall tax should copper prices exceed $10,000 per metric ton. We don't feel necessarily that there has been a significant policy shift, but I think there have been some uncoordinated announcements that have been made around investments into Zambia, particularly those privatization deals that have been investigated, as well as some suggestions around how they aim to increase the amount of money that is received from the mineral resource sector.
Well, Yvette, if we could just touch on... Yeah, if we could also touch further on some of the policies that have been put in place. It seems, as you mentioned, a bit of uncoordinated action that is occurring in certain instances when it comes to policy. Do you think that Michael Sata, the president of the country, is starting to relook a lot of the resource policies, for example, given the fact that rhetoric is coming out, $10,000 and above, then a windfall tax will be implemented? Could we actually see more moves like this, which would then naturally perhaps strengthen the kwacha, so then no intervention would be required?
Well, there's been a long-standing contentious nature of the taxation of the mining industry, and you've seen that under previous regimes as well as this one, that the taxation of the mining sector has been revisited. And obviously we did see the introduction of the windfall tax in 2008, which was subsequently reversed, and some other concessions were given in terms of the variable corporate tax that took the place of the windfall tax, and more recently the increase of the mineral royalty taxes. So mineral royalty taxes under the 2012 budget were doubled from 3% to 6%. So I would say in all, the government is very keen to address perceived, the perceived lack of funds that are being obtained from the mineral resource sector, particularly in fiscal resources. So there's definitely a desire to try and address that, both through increasing the transparency of the value and volumes of exports, as well as the tax incentives that have been given to the mining sector. And this is something that they also have announced in terms of reinvestigating those incentives and re-looking at the amount of tax that is outstanding through an audit of the mining companies.
So let's shift over to Mozambique, because the MPC announcement was delayed given the fact that they are awaiting the CPI numbers. We know that inflation dipped to 5.5% year on year in December. We also saw an interest rate cut over that period. Inflation is starting to tick lower. May I say that it's even lower than what we see here in South Africa. So a very different scenario that is playing out in Mozambique relative to the other emerging markets on the African continent.
Definitely. So what we've obviously seen is they contrast quite sharply with, for example, the East African countries that are still battling with very high levels of inflation. Even in South Africa, where high levels were growing, food prices are having an implication for the headline number. What we're seeing is that Mozambique, we've had consecutive months of disinflation, and we saw in December that inflation reached a low of 5.5% from above 17% earlier that year. So we've seen a very strong concerted effort by the central bank to tighten monetary policy over 2011, moving to a more neutral stance towards the fourth quarter. And through lower prices, particularly in the food basket, we've seen that they have been able to establish a disinflationary trend, which we believe will be continued, not least because of the base effects that will come into play in the first quarter of this year. So that does give the central bank more room to loosen.
So Yvette, very quickly, onto more pertinent and serious issues when it comes to what we'll see in Zambia over the weekend. African Cup of Nations, Zambia versus the Ivory Coast. What is your sense with regards to the mood there? And given the fact that we haven't seen intervention, maybe the central bank is just sitting on the sidelines waiting to see what happens on the soccer front, if I may be so brave to say.
Monday could be a very exciting day indeed for Zambia, and I do hope that they, as the underdog and the surprising participant of the finals, do manage to achieve a win in what is for them a very emotional event, considering what happened in 1993 when they lost their whole soccer team. So I do wish them all the best and do hope that they have a successful outcome.